There are a lot of people who believe they are prepared and they know what's coming for this country. They are sadly mistaken and they are entirely unprepared. I've been trying to warn about this on this channel for about the last year and a half, 2 years, but if I could sum it up in one picture, this would do it. For those of you who are unaware, this is Kim Potter. She was the police officer that drew her service weapon and accidentally, without any intent, killed a man named Daunte Wright, and she got sentenced to prison. Well, she's being released after only 16 months because of the extenuating circumstances. There was no intent. Now, this is what only 16 months did to someone who worked in law enforcement, who would probably have a little bit of a better insight into what to expect in prison than the average person. This is what it did to her. What's coming for most North Americans is going to be orders of magnitude worse than prison. And it was covered yesterday in a very short video that came from the previous president. A lot of people disagreed with it. You see, this particular woman had all sorts of support on the outside, which is key for anyone who gets sentenced to any kind of time in prison. Having someone on the outside to put money on your books, phone calls, visitation, advocate, lawyers, all this kind of stuff makes a huge difference to those on the inside. There's a lot of people on the inside who don't have that, and they get lost in the system. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Well, real quick, before we get into it, I always want to be diligent, say thank you to everyone who's joined us here. It's a conversation that's not an easy one to have. And here at YouTube, unfortunately, we've got to kind of keep things PG-13. We can't talk about the real stories, but over at the Florida Marquee Patreon channel, where a lot of you have stepped up and pledged the $1, thank you. Thank you very, very much. You guys are making a huge difference. Over there, we can take the gloves off because we can put the content on the Vimeo servers, away from Google's prying, censoring eyes. And we can talk about things like adults without having to necessarily worry about saying the wrong word or offending someone's feelings. It's just the reality. Now, let me ask you a question. What would you do? I guarantee after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months in, you could have probably come to Kim Potter and said, hey, there's this thing. It will get you out of prison today. And you'll sleep in your own bed and you'll have a decent meal. It's a little immoral. It's not illegal, but it's a little immoral. But, this is a way out, so to speak. I guarantee she would have taken it. I guarantee she wouldn't have even asked. And I guarantee you wouldn't either. If you were put in this kind of a position. You're like, okay, so it's not going to lead to any more jail time? No. It's a little immoral and somewhat uncomfortable, but you will have your own place again. You'll wear your own clothes again. You'll have air conditioning. You'll have heat. You'll have proper food. You'll have access to Hulu and Netflix, and you'll have basically the life you had before. Yeah, the job is a little bit immoral, but no question whatsoever. How can I prove this? How many guys, big, tough, strong, best of the best guys in the military, go sign up for BUD, SEAL training, and then end up within a week ringing the bell, saying enough, I can't handle it. It's too tough. It's more than I can deal with. Even though I was the best of the best, the cream of the crop, I will do anything to get out of here, and I'm going to go ring that bell. If you have a wife, sister, daughter, a niece, a mother, a girlfriend, you need to pay attention. You see, guys, when you talk about things being tough, things being hard, things being difficult going forward, they like to play tough guy. And, myself included. But when you talk about things getting difficult for loved ones, especially female loved ones, an entirely different attitude comes out. You could ask any of these girls, they wouldn't even question the morality. They wouldn't question it whatsoever. Depending on how long they've been in, no problem. Now, what does this have to do with anything that's really happening? Well, now keep that same energy. Keep that same thought. There are a lot of people out there right now who are maintaining massive arsenals because, and let's just say the quiet part out loud. Let's just say the quiet part out loud. You want to maintain yourself as a possible threat to national security. No, I don't, Mucky. I want to maintain freedom. Let's just say the quiet part out loud. Meaning, from their perspective, if they can't control you, and remember, criminals don't obey laws. Before you continue typing, I know you're typing. Criminals don't obey laws. And we know we have criminals in charge in D.C. And they're the ones who get to decide what a crime is and what a crime isn't. They're the ones who are going to get to decide what treason is and what treason isn't. They're the ones who are going to decide what a threat to national security is and what a threat to national security isn't. And anything that might threaten their power to do what they want to do is a threat to national security. So, stick with me. Stick with me, because it all dovetails together. You see, you can talk about the Fifth Amendment, you can talk about the Second Amendment, you can talk about the 14th Amendment, about not depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. But what do we know about criminals? They don't care about the law. Patriot Act overrides everything. Now, everything I just said, keep this in mind. When you hear what the president has to say about ending the nightmare of homeless drug addicts and dangerously deranged, you notice he's in this clip from yesterday that he doesn't talk about the drug addicts that are paying rent. You see, there are people out there, all sorts of addicts out there that aren't living in tent cities, that they're, for one reason or the other, they're functioning. Whether it's alcohol, whether it's weed, whether it's cigarettes, whether it's whatever. If they're, paying their bills and going to work or doing whatever they're doing, no plan for them. It's only the inconvenient ones that have the tents on the sidewalks that he wants to pick up and take out to some place, some inexpensive tract of land, and then fence them in. Away from the cities, away from polite society. So we've established now in this video 3 different places you can exist. You can exist in the city and pay your bills. You can exist in the city and not pay your bills, live in the tent city. You can be a prisoner, or you can live in the wilderness. Now, truly, there is no more wilderness. There is no place that isn't owned. See, for the vast majority of the beginning of this country, there was always west. See, we don't have west anymore. See, this is what the king wanted to do. What Donald Trump talked about yesterday, what he talked about yesterday was exactly what the King of England wanted to do. He wanted to move the undesirables. You remember just the 3% that rebelled? It was only 3% of the colonists that actually fought against England. He wanted to push them west, push them out of polite society, because the vast majority of people living in Boston and living in South Carolina and living in Virginia didn't really have a problem with the king. Yeah, it was a pain in the ass to pay taxes, and yeah, the soldiers could be a little bit pushy, but it wasn't a reason to rise up against the king. Well, you see, this is what's going on now. We have someone who wants to, without due process of law, round people up and put them in the wilderness, never more to be seen again. And if you don't think this hasn't been tried, this is right from Ocala, Florida. City Council will consider lease for homeless tent city. Look at the date. June 3, 2013. At the request of city staff, the Ocala City Council will consider how to proceed with leasing city-owned land off Northwest 35th Street and US 441-301 for a proposed temporary shelter for homeless men and women. You might ask, how did this work out? It didn't. It didn't. You know why it didn't? The village would provide safe shelter for people from law enforcement diversion programs as well as an area for those who are working to end their homelessness. See, this has been tried. These tent cities turn into nightmares. And make no mistake what we're talking about here. The reason that they are living in tents on the sidewalk is because they couldn't pay their rent. They were behind. It's a form of a debtor's prison. This is from 1783. There were people back then that couldn't pay their bills. Built in 1783 in one corner of the jail yard to serve as a residence for the jailer, the building served in this capacity for 41 years. Iron bars, oak batten doors, and locks right in 1842, and it was converted into a prison for debtors in Accomack County. This is from Virginia. This is also from Virginia, where they would have a cage, and people would sometimes go by and they would drop a coin here, drop a coin there, and eventually some people were able to gather up enough. But, and this is from YouTube, forced into a certain kind of work by cost of living crisis. You see, back then, women didn't exist in debtor's prison, primarily because entering into a contract with a woman was seen as lowbrow, meaning that you couldn't really enter in any kind of a business negotiation. Women didn't have those rights back then. But they were always had this other opportunity to work off their debt. This other opportunity to make good on what they owed. Which brings us all the way back to here. See, when you hear about somebody say, "Oh, we're going to clean up to get the tents off the sidewalks," you're going to take a problem. You're going to take a problem that still exists, and you're just going to put it out of sight. And once the problem is out of sight, you don't fix the problem, do you? Once the problem is out of sight, where is the motivation to actually fix the root cause of the problem? This is like kids saying, telling a kid, clean the room. What does a kid do? Shoves everything under the bed. See, the reason the vast majority of these people are homeless and living in tents is one reason and one reason only. Why is it a problem now? Why are we hearing about it now? Because of 2020 and what the government did. Shutting everything down. Lockdown. All the supply chain hiccups. Everything that got all of these people thrown out of whatever because they couldn't afford this, couldn't afford that, because they couldn't work or whatever reason. Even if you want to make the allegation about mental issues or stress or whatever that led to the drug addiction or drug abuse, it all has its root one place. Washington, D.C. Because notice, we didn't hear about this on a national level prior to 2020, did we? Did Donald Trump say a word about this when he was running for president in 15 or 16? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Were there homeless back then? Sure. There sure were. I want to play this again because I think it's important to hear what he actually said, and I want you to listen closely to what he's really talking about.
Great cities have become unlivable, unsanitary nightmares, surrendered to the homeless, the drug addicted, and the violent and dangerously deranged. We're making many suffer for the whims of a deeply unwell few, and they are unwell indeed. The homeless have no right to turn every park and sidewalk into a place for them to squat and do drugs. Americans should not have to step over piles of meals and waste as they walk down a street in a beautiful city, or at least once beautiful city, because they've changed so much over the last 10 years. Our first consideration should be the rights and safety of the hardworking, law-abiding citizens who make our society function. When I'm back in the White House, we will use every tool, lever, and authority to get the homeless off our streets. We want to take care of them, but they have to be off our streets. There's nothing compassionate about letting these individuals live in filth and squalor rather than getting them the help that they need. We need professionals to help them. For a small fraction of what we spend upon Ukraine, we could take care of every homeless veteran in America. Our veterans are being treated horribly. Likewise, with all of the money we will save by ending mass unskilled migration, we will have a huge dividend to address this crisis in our own country. Under my strategy working with states, we will ban urban camping wherever possible. Violators of these bans will be arrested, but they will be given the option to accept treatment and services if they're willing to be rehabilitated. Many of them don't want that. We'll give them the option. We'll then open up large parcels of inexpensive land, bring in doctors, psychiatrists, social workers, and drug rehab specialists, and create 10 cities where the homeless can be relocated and their problems identified. But we'll open up our cities again, make them livable and make them beautiful. For those who are just temporarily down on their luck, we will work to help them quickly reintegrate into a normal life. For those who have addictions, substance abuse, and common mental health problems, we will get them into treatment. And for those who are severely mentally ill and deeply disturbed, we will bring them back to mental institutions where they belong, with the goal of reintegrating them back into society once they are well enough to manage. It's a tough task, a very tough task. What's taken place on the streets, what's taken place with they're taking so much drugs. But the fact is, we're going to try. This strategy will be far better and also far less expensive than spending vast sums of taxpayer money to house the homeless in luxury hotels without addressing their underlying issues. And they have so many of these underlying issues and needs. This is how I will end the scourge of homelessness and make our cities clean and safe and beautiful once again. We will do it. We will bring back America. Thank you.
It's just absolutely stunning for those who hear it. That America is great as long as all of the streets are clean. And if we have any kind of issues with homelessness or issues with people down on their luck or panhandlers, America's not great. We need to return America to greatness. Mark my words. And here's, if you still aren't with me on this, what's your best case scenario? Those of you who are voting for Donald Trump. And this should really wake you up. At best, at very best, if he would get elected in 2024, he would be out by 2028. And based on this precedent of being able to scoop up people without due process of law, and this is the second time, by the way, he has talked about taking away something from people without any due process, prior due process. Due process doesn't exist if it's done after the fact. Let's just be very clear, as in seize the guns first, due process second. That's not due process. Seize the person first, due process second? No. Whether it's seizing your guns or whether it's seizing you or your tent or whatever, and then carting you off to parts unknown. And to be very clear, parts unknown means the wilderness. You're going to get forgotten about out there. Now, what happens in 2029 when a liberal takes over, which we know how this thing goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth? I guarantee, guess who else is going to be seen as a threat to American greatness? You see, right now there's a collusion happening because we're seeing all of these different mass shooting events, and they seem to be tied to a certain group of people. Well, they're going to say, okay, yeah, you're right. I mean, this is another reason we need just to make sure that, that those on the right are a threat and those on the left are a threat. We just need to take away the threat. We just need to take away the threat. And whether you think you're on the right side of things or the wrong side of things, they're going to label you, just like they're labeling the homeless now. They created the homeless, and now they're labeling them. They created the drug addiction, and now they're getting rid of those people in society. They created this, and they're going to get rid of you too. And for guys, like, well, I'm going to tough it out. I'm going to just suck it up like I did in the military and things were tough. I want you to think about this clearly, because it isn't going to be just you. Isn't going to be just you saying, military is tough and man, or this prison sentence is tough, or I'm just going to suck it up. I want you to think about this applying to everyone and the choices that will face everyone, because it's going to get orders of magnitude 1,000 times 1,000 worse. 16 months. This is what happens to someone 16 months. And remember, on the right, she wasn't sleeping outside. Meals, to some extent, something to eat was provided, guarantee. A place to sleep that probably wasn't the floor, likely wasn't the floor, was provided. Prison's a little different than jail. A certain basic level of health care was afforded. She wasn't not exposed to the elements. And look what 16 months did to somebody who knew what was coming. Mark my words. Mark my words. It is going to be something where people are going to be like, hey, wait a minute, hold on. Nobody on YouTube ever told us to prepare for the end like this. It's going to be bad. It's already happening. And this is a video from Great Britain. This is a video from Great Britain, Channel 4 News, 2.54 million subscribers, forced into a certain kind of work by cost of living crisis. This is just for cost of living. Imagine debtor's prison. Imagine being forced into this against your will. And imagine what's going to go on. A lot of people say, well, I'm going to go to the wilderness. I'm going to go to the wilderness. If it were true wilderness, and there was no 911, and there was no fire, and there were no social services, and there was no government to call or run to, what do you think is really going to go on out here? You think it's going to be just a bunch of people lighting campfires and having church meetings on Sundays and trapping squirrels? And that isn't what happened in the wilderness here when they discovered this country. Or I should say, they arrived in this country. It isn't what happened at all. The real history got erased. Because, of course, we teach this to, well, I probably shouldn't go down this road, but there's a reason they sanitized it. Because it wasn't meant for certain ears. So I'll leave it there. Once again, join us over at Patreon. We can say the quiet parts out loud and in the right language and say what needs to be said. $1 per month, even less if you sign up for an entire year. Fully refundable first 90 days. No questions asked. Those of you who have, once again, God bless you. Thank you so much. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.